Number 9. AEROTRAIN. Developed by French engineer Jean Bertin, the AEROTRAIN was an experimental tracked air cushion vehicle, TACV, better known as a hover train. It traveled over a reinforced concrete monorail track on an air cushion created by powerful compressors. Designed to eliminate the rolling resistance of wheeled vehicles, it could travel at unprecedented speed without the complications and costs that came with the similarly designed maglev's complex electromagnetic track. The US-based company Roar Industries Inc. licensed the technology in 1969 and built a $10 million fully operational prototype in hopes of defeating its competitors for a high-speed ground transportation contract with the US Department of Transportation. The 94-foot electric prototype was designed to hold 60 passengers and could easily go at least 150 miles per hour. A second prototype reached a record speed of 262 miles per hour. But the government funding ran out and the Roar prototype was never commercialized. If Bertin's vision had come to fruition, it would have undoubtedly been a state-of-the-art development that revolutionized rail travel. The train is currently at the Pueblo Rail Museum, which said it plans to restore the train and put it on display. The test track sits seemingly out of place in the French countryside. There's one platform on each end, as well as a middle station in Cheville. Only a small portion of the track was demolished. The rest remains virtually unchanged. Number 8. Dubai's abandoned supercars. It's pretty rare to see an abandoned car that's worth a lot of money in most places, but it became an especially common sight in Dubai amid the onset of the 2008 global financial crisis. It may seem like an irrational way to handle one's financial problems, but people left their luxury cars behind because outdated laws meant that they could go to jail for a long time for defaulting on their auto loan. So it comes as no surprise that many ditched their vehicles, and those who were able to leave hightailed it out of the country to avoid ending up behind bars. Lamborghinis, Porsches, Bentleys, Koenigsegg's, BMWs, and other high-end cars routinely began turning up outside airports and in parking lots. Between 2,000 and 3,000 vehicles were deserted every year as their owners found themselves unable to keep up with the payments. Thankfully, the law has changed. Vehicle owners no longer risk imprisonment when they fall behind on payments, and fewer vehicles are being abandoned. But there's still an abundance of leftover vehicles from over the years. Last year, social media influencer Supercar Blondie uploaded shocking footage of a scrapyard filled with hundreds of dust-covered luxury cars in Dubai. Some appear damaged, while others had no visible defects. In the event that someone deserts their car, they now have up to 6 months to pay a fine and retrieve it from the impound lot. Unclaimed vehicles are sold at auction for much cheaper than they're worth. Number 7. A $4 million barn find. In early 2018, a North Carolina man named Warren Kramer reached out to barn find hunter host Tom Cotter about 2 extremely valuable classic cars inside his friend's garage. The property was unoccupied and the city had recently condemned it, and the house and garage were slated for demolition. It was imperative to get the 2 cars out of there and relocate them in order to save them. The 1966 Ferrari 275 GTB2 and 1967 Shelby Cobra 427 had languished in the homeowner's garage for 27 years. His trusted mechanic had passed away nearly 30 years earlier in 1991, and the owner was extremely selective about who he hired to work on his rare cars. But he never found someone to take over the job, and so they sat. Classic car insurance company Hagerty estimated the car's value at $4 million, even after nearly 3 decades of neglect. No local towing companies would relocate them because of the liabilities that came along with moving such valuable cargo. Cotter was left with no choice but to transport the cars himself. They were dusty and infested with crickets and mice, but both cars were in surprisingly great shape for having sat forgotten for so long. The Shelby-built Cobra had just 19,000 miles on it, and the Ferrari, which the owner had purchased in the early 80s for $47,000, had a little over 13,000 miles. Gooding & Company sold the vehicles as is at their Amelia Island, Florida auction for $3.5 million. When the cars were serviced before the event, they started right up, although their exhaust pipes spewed rodent droppings across the garage. In Cotter's words, it was a small price to pay. Do you know anyone with an old rare car just sitting in their garage? What kind of car is it? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. American Star Shipwreck. Built in 1940, the SS American Star was meant to be a luxury cruise ship, but it ended up transporting U.S. troops overseas during World War II. The ship was camouflaged and used to evacuate 483,000 soldiers throughout the conflict. After the war, it finally turned into a luxury cruise ship as it was originally intended. It made its maiden voyage as a cruise ship in 1946 when it traveled from New York City to Southampton. That's the reverse route traveled by the Titanic on its ill-fated maiden voyage. From there, the American Star changed hands numerous times, underwent several renovations, and operated under many different names. But time took its toll on the ship, as it does with all vessels. In 1993, the American Star was sold to a Thai company for $2 million after going 16 years without maintenance, rendering its engines unusable. The new owner hoped to turn it into a floating luxury hotel. But things went horribly awry in early 1994 while the ship was being transported to its new home. The American Star encountered a rough storm off the Canary Islands, and the tugboat that was towing it lost control of the vessel. A few days later, it ran aground and broke in two near Fuerteventura. The ship was left behind, having been declared a total loss, and looters stripped it of its valuables. For 13 years, the front half of the American Star sat partially submerged near the beach. Finally, in 2007, it sank beneath the waves. Number 5. Orient Express Train. While exploring a train graveyard in Belgium several years ago, Rotterdam-based photographer Brian Romijn spotted what looked like an abandoned Orient Express train. He snapped some haunting photos of the old vehicle, which has sat in the train yard ever since it was taken out of service. It last operated as a luxury service over a half-century ago. Romijn said that seeing the car was like stepping back in time. Originally called the Express de Orient, the Orient Express ran for 133 years from 1883 to 2009. Several different train companies used the name and applied it to several different routes. One of its most famous routes operated between Istanbul and Paris during the 1930s. Over 75 years later, the final train ride under the Orient Express name ran between Strasbourg, France and Vienna, Austria. Once the pride of Belgium's national railway, the deserted and decaying train is the last of its type left. Some suspect that it's not actually an Orient Express train because those routes never passed through Belgium. Either way, the train is impressive, and it looks like it could have competed with the Orient Express in terms of luxury. Number 4. Backyard Ferrari. The 1950 Ferrari 166 Barchetta is an extremely rare car. Only 25 were ever made with a 2-liter V12 engine. Surprisingly, nearly all are accounted for, and most of them still exist. Automotive historian Michael T. Lynch described the model as timeless, and the car that made Ferrari. At the time it debuted, Ferrari had only been in business for 3 years. Over 50 years ago, a man living in Europe bought the 166 Barchetta for his friend Reg Lee Litton and had it shipped to the man's home in Scottsdale, Arizona. He probably paid between $5,000 and $8,000 for the vehicle, according to Lynch. It doesn't sound like much, but in today's money, that would amount to somewhere between $57,000 and $92,000. Litton enjoyed his Ferrari, but it eventually broke. Instead of getting it fixed, he parked it in his backyard, covered it with carpets and plastic, and basically forgot about it. It sat there until Litton died, and at some point someone removed the rugs that were covering the car, leaving it exposed to the elements. The Ferrari was in rough shape. It was extremely faded and the paint was chipped, but Litton's children eventually managed to sell it for around $1 million. The buyer, Del Arroz, said that he was attracted to the Barchetta's originality, even if that meant it was weathered. Arroz researched the Ferrari and found that it was in numerous famous races back during its glory days, including the Le Mans and Silverstone. While rebuilding the engine, Ferrari expert Patrick Otis discovered the date 6949 etched into the motor, confirming that legendary driver Juan Manuel Fangio had raced the car. Number 3. MV Aurora. The German-built luxury cruise ship MV Aurora was launched in 1955 as the Wappen von Hamburg. It was the first ship that Germany was allowed to build after World War II. Throughout its career, it sailed as the Delos, Polar Star, Pacific Star, Xanadu, Expex, and Faithful, just to name a few. The 293-foot-long vessel became famous for its upscale accommodations and is even said to have inspired the fictional TV series Love Boat. It boasted 85 boutique cabins, an Art Deco lounge, spacious sun decks, and impressive reception galleries. By the time the ship became the Aurora in 2010, its days as a luxury liner were long over. The vessel had been sold and repurposed in the late 70s amid a decline in the cruise industry. It served as a crabbing ship, housed religious converts, and served various other functions. As it fell further into disrepair, it bounced from owner to owner and was ultimately declared abandoned in 2007. The following year, a San Joaquin County, California resident named Chris Wilson saw a Craigslist ad for the ship. He had no experience with renovating cruise ships but was intrigued. Wilson bought the Aurora from a marine salvage dealer in hopes of turning it into a museum. Only then did he realize how much work it's going to take to restore the vessel to its former glory. But Wilson remains passionate about the project and is slowly bringing the decrepit ship back to life with help from volunteers. He lives on the ship full-time and hopes to eventually turn it into a public attraction. Number 2. EUROSTAR train. On the outskirts of Valenciennes in northern France, there's a decaying high-speed train that once shuttled passengers through the Channel Tunnel, or Channel, between England and France. Known as the EUROSTAR 373018, it began operating in 1994 and is just one of many 373 class EUROSTAR trains. In addition to transporting riders between London and Paris, it also stopped in Brussels, Belgium, reaching speeds of up to 186 miles per hour. Numerous EUROSTAR 373s have been decommissioned since 2016, even though they only operated for 22 or 23 years, making them far younger than most newly retired trains. Only a few 373s remain in service today, and while the EUROSTAR 37318 is technically in storage, judging by its appearance, I think it's safe to say it's abandoned. It's covered in graffiti, and even the overgrown tracks it sits on are heavily rusted. 373s were taken out of service for several reasons. It appears as though their technology became outdated, and that it was cheaper and easier to design and build a new fleet with a higher seating capacity than it would have been to remodel and continue to operate the 373s. So even though the trains were in unusually good condition when they were withdrawn, they were technically considered life expired. Number 1. TSS Duke of Lancaster. The British passenger ferry and cruise ship TSS Duke of Lancaster was built at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland in 1956. It shuttled commuters back and forth between Lancashire, England and Northern Ireland. Its leisure destinations included the Scottish Isles, Belgium, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands and Spain. The Duke of Lancaster's cruise services ended in the mid-1960s when it was converted into a car ferry in order to keep up with competition. When renovations were complete, the boat held up to 1,200 passengers and 105 vehicles. In 1979, the vessel was sold to a company based in North Wales with plans to turn it into an arcade called the Fun Ship. The leisure center closed in 2004 due to ongoing legal battles with the local council, which opposed the business. Subsequent owners faced similar problems, causing them to walk away from any plans they had for the Duke of Lancaster. For over 40 years now, the ship has languished in the same spot. It's rusting heavily and deteriorating and has become more of an eyesore than it probably would be as an operating business. The games left behind from the arcade were cleared out in 2012. Around the same time, graffiti artists were invited to liven up the Duke of Lancaster's appearance by adding their own personal touches to the outside. Hey, the sight of graffiti beats having to look at a dilapidated, crumbling ship. There appear to be no future plans for the vessel, leaving one to wonder how long it'll sit and rot. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about fascinating abandoned vehicles, let us know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.